Urban legends. They often sound like real news, but they're more often just enticing fables. Odd stories about bizarre reversals of fortune, or tragedies with a sinister twist. There's something disquieting about them, which is part of what makes them popular. I'm Natasha Henstridge, and for the next hour, I'll be your guide through the mysterious universe of urban legends revealed. Part of the appeal of urban life is anonymity. You can disappear into the masses without everyone watching how you live your life. But our next legend suggests that there's a clear downside to living in the lonely crowd.
This story centers on a product of the modern world, the worker bee, whose labor is taken for granted. Herman, who does payroll accounting, has spent his career going unnoticed. The only time anyone pays attention to him is on Friday, when the paychecks go out. The rest of the week, he spends his hours in complete anonymity. He's a loyal employee, always the last one to leave at night, and always the first to arrive in the morning. Every day, it's exactly the same routine. During the usual hustle of the day, he's a non-entity.
This report's done on Friday.
A quiet soul who's easy to miss in the lonely crowd of the corporate machine. Predictable as the sunrise, replaceable as a paperclip. He spends his days isolated with his bookkeeping. Until one Monday morning, when for no special reason, because there is nothing special about Herman, he dies. Peacefully, silently, right there at his desk. One less bee in the busy hive. Day after day, the others race about blindly, taking care of business, while Herman sits undisturbed in his cubicle, unnoticed by the rest of the world. Until Friday.
Hey, did you get paid?
As the week comes to an end, everyone starts to wonder where the paychecks are. Eventually, the boss hears all the worried buzz.
What's going on out here?
We didn't get the check. This is Friday.
And decides to get to the bottom of it.
I mean, what was the name of the guy?
Swindell.
Then, and only then, is Herman's 4-day-old corpse discovered.
Oh my God.
For a moment, there's a ripple of shock through the office. But, as with all huge institutions, the grand plan won't be interrupted. The workers get their paychecks, and the following Monday, Herman's replacement is at the helm, laboring away just as Herman did before him. But is such a story possible? Could a deceased office worker go unnoticed for 4 full days? Or is this tale just dead wrong? This corporate account emerged in the British press in December of 2000 about a man named George Turkelbaum.
I think this legend uses the idea of the transgression of boundaries, which I think is probably the prime topic of all urban legend. And the transgression here, of course, is between the world of the living and the world of the dead.
It's tempting to believe such a story, given the endless bustle of modern life and the anonymity of large urban environments. Like ant colonies found in nature, man-made multinationals are paperwork production lines where the individual can be reduced to a cog in a vast living machine. This fear of dehumanization is what gives the legend its emotional clout and the ring of truth. It's a fear that's been around since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, and it's produced prophecies of a future populated by mindless drones doing meaningless labor. The cult of the robot man, defined only by what he can produce. But are such fears overrated? Witness Autodesk, a company that puts a human face on the high-pressure world of computer software.
Probably sit.
There's a great expression about I went out to hire an employee and I got a person. Sometimes companies think that's a negative thing. I think we really embrace that. And so we have a lot of programs to take account of things that they do in their private life. Employees can bring their dogs. Dogs sit in their offices with them or in their cubes with them. So if you can take away those worries, then I think that they're going to be the most productive.
It may look like goofing off, but it stimulates more enthusiasm for the work when every day is a casual Friday. But Autodesk is an exception to the rule. What about the rest of the world? Have things become so impersonal that someone could die on the job and go unnoticed until his paperwork was due?
It wouldn't surprise me if it were true, because I've visited many corporate work environments over the past few years, and they're big, and people become very faceless, very inhuman, and it's because companies are growing so quickly and they often don't take the time to build the relationships to become an effective team.
So, to create a sense of personal worth and teamwork, Adventure Associates provide the desk-bound with a little outward bound.
Well, it really has more to do with getting out of the office and just finding a great environment for getting to know each other better, practicing problem solving, looking at perceived risk together as a team and how they might support each other to meet those challenges or risks.
Keep breathing. 1, 2, 3. Oh, he got it! Woo!
Great.
That's awesome.
That's it.
It's a form of climbing the corporate ladder that creates cooperation instead of cutthroat competition.
Yeah!
A philosophy clearly absent in the legend, and in many companies where winning the rat race still makes you a rat. So in a world where millions earn a living as one step in a production line, dying unnoticed in the midst of endless toil doesn't seem so far-fetched. And there are true accounts where people have died and gone unnoticed for weeks. But these were instances where shut-ins died in their homes. What about dying in the next cubicle? Even if the worker's personality made little impression, as time passed, wouldn't his dead body get a bit of attention?
When the body decays, the bacteria, which are normally in the gastrointestinal tract, don't stay there anymore. So they move throughout the body, they produce gas, and the person would start to smell.
Hey,
I think everybody in the building would know that they were there.
Swindell.
Much as we would like to condemn the impersonal nature of urban life, a working stiff would not go unnoticed, and no coroner has any record of a corporate corpse. If there's dead weight in the cubicle next to you, chances are he's got a paycheck and a pulse. This is a story of a dead worker who requires a live replacement. But in our next legend, a dead engine requires some live ammo. True or false? American and Canadian companies once used linen wrappings from Egyptian mummies to make wrapping paper. The answer, when we return. Did companies once use linen from Egyptian mummies to make wrapping paper? True. In the 1860s, U.S. and Canadian companies bought shiploads of mummies to make wrapping paper until a cholera epidemic was traced to the paper.
Technology is often at the center of urban legends because of our anxieties about gadgets we don't understand. In this particular story, it's the lowbrows who can't handle low tech.
This little adventure begins with a couple of good old boys out on one of their favorite pastimes. Squirrel hunting.
I got one!
It's not a sport for everyone, but Jed and Dwayne seem to have pretty good luck at it.
They can be mean if they're not dead. It's dead! Smell it.
And after long hours of stalking the woods, they decide to call it a day and head home. Out here in the sticks, they're pretty isolated from the rest of the world, which which is just what they like.
Alrighty.
Unfortunately, when they go to start up the truck, the engine won't turn over. Great.
Did you put gas in it? Well, yeah, he put gas in it. Go check under the hood. Oh, jeez.
It takes some time poking around under the hood and under the dashboard to figure out what's wrong.
I got it. It's a blown fuse.
Normally, this is a small problem, but out in the middle of nowhere, it leaves them seriously stuck. Until Dwayne comes up with what seems a clever idea. The bullets of their .22 caliber rifles are the same size as the burnt fuse. So they'll fit neatly into the fuse box and make a perfect makeshift fuse. It's a temporary solution, but at least it'll get them home. So Dwayne clips the bullet into place, and when Jed goes to start up the truck, the engine roars into life.
Oh, Dwayne, you're a dang genius.
I'll tell you what, I am.
In no time, they're on the road, headed home. For the next few miles, everything is fine. They shoot the breeze and enjoy the ride. And then suddenly, an explosion. And then Jed seems to go insane. He starts screaming and drives wildly all over the road. Dwayne's got no clue what's going on. The truck careens out of control, right off the road, and into a tree. Then Jed rolls right out of the truck and sits on the ground, groaning in agony. Dwayne recovers from the crash and scrambles to his buddy's aid, wondering what the devil happened.
I've been shot!
Then he gets a look at Jed's leg. It's stained with blood. Turns out the bullet in the fuse box had so much current going through it, the gunpowder ignited and fired hot lead right into Jed's leg. An amusing backcountry fable. But is it true, or is this a tale we should refuse to take seriously? As with many urban legends, the moral of the story here is, don't try this at home. The account first circulated on the internet as an article supposedly taken from the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. The story is funny, in part because it traffics in a popular stereotype of the ignorant Southerner, that cliché backwoods cousin commonly known as the redneck.
Beauty.
Yeah, he's dead. Smell it.
Yeah, it's dead.
That's how you know they're really dead. The smell.
I think one of the reasons that we can make fun of rednecks is because we associate rednecks with so many things that are problematic in our society. So we're essentially making fun of ourselves and our problematic beliefs, but assigning them to a different group. Every part of the United States has racial problems. Every part of the United States has people that are uneducated, or people who are not well spoken. And yet if we can attribute it to a specific group of people, then we can feel better about ourselves. We don't like them because they're racist. We don't like them because they're uneducated. So in that sense, it really allows that feeling of superiority by everyone, including, by the way, urban Southerners.
The legend exploits this stereotype by suggesting that rednecks see guns as the solution to pretty much every problem, even engine trouble.
An idea here.
Idea.
Use a bullet.
Bullet? Hell, use a bullet.
Just do it.
The gun culture issue, I think, is huge. Someone who is urban, who is educated, who is not from the South, or at least not from the rural South, it allows that person who's looking at this to say, see how these people are? I know I'm not like that. I am more sophisticated than that. Even if I have a handgun, I know that bullets are for guns. Even if I have a shotgun, I would never use the weaponry in any other manner. I know that guns should be kept safe.
Of course, the other part of the legend that hits home is the association of good old boys with their trucks. There's just nothing like sitting in your honking four-wheel drive, tearing up the road. And since the legend meets at the intersection of guns and trucks, it's a perfect fable of redneck resourcefulness. But does gunning your engine with a .22 caliber fuse really work?
I've experienced scenarios like the urban legend is talking about. Been stranded. A scenario comes around where we blow a circuit, blow a fuse, whether it be for ignition, headlights, wipers, and you just make do, with whatever you can scavenge up.
But if you scavenge up a bullet, will it fire up your truck?
What I'm going to show you is how, in this scenario, it would work as a demonstration. We'll go ahead and we'll take a .22 caliber bullet, pop out the blown fuse. In this case, it was an ignition circuit that had blown. We'll pop the old fuse out, pop in a .22 caliber bullet, and see if it works. Snap that in there.
And sure enough, the engine kicks over. A bullet can work as a fuse.
Actually, the size of a .22 caliber bullet works very well. If you're able to come across one, you don't have to modify. You can just snap it in, snap it out, and get out of your situation pretty quick. Any type of ferrous, and even some of the non-ferrous metals will conduct electricity. We've come up with bolts, coins, and shotgun shells.
Other versions of the legend claim that it's the fuse for the headlights that was replaced. Would that work as well?
The headlight fuse is actually part of the headlight switch, and you wouldn't be able to take care of that with a simple bullet or something like that.
So, only certain versions of the legend will work, but all the versions claim the bullet discharges and hits the driver. What's the upshot on that detail?
A bullet actually takes a firing pin to fire the primer cap in the bullet to set off the charge inside of the bullet itself. You are just completing an electrical circuit, and there is not enough amperage to create any heat in the bullet, and would not discharge the actual bullet itself. There would be no reason for the bullet to go off.
It turns out the internet claim that this story came from the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette was a hoax. It never appeared there. But if that's the case, then why does this tale of Southern discomfort continue to be repeated as fact?
I think the South actually is the place in the United States that has a regional identity. The rest of the United States has become, over the course of the past, say, 50 years, more and more normalized, in part because of television and in part because of the media. But the South has maintained this separate identity.
Ironically, it's the rest of the country's ignorance of the South that causes this knee slapper to have plenty of firepower.
What happened? I've been shot!
In this story, a driver loses a fuse. But in our next legend, the driver loses something much more precious. True or false? Mama Cass Elliott died from choking on a ham sandwich. The answer, when we return. Did Mama Cass Elliott die from choking on a ham sandwich? False. The medical examiner's report says she died of heart failure.
Carelessness is a common theme in many urban legends, and it happens to some people more than others. In the following story, one couple seems to have more than their fair share.
It's not easy being a baby. Of course, it's no picnic being a new parent either. What with diaper changes, 3 a.m. feedings, and crying at all hours, it's very taxing. And if you take it all on the road, it can drive parents to a frazzle.
Oh, that's giving me such a headache.
In the case of this couple, headed out on a long drive to Grandma's house, their nerves are rubbing raw. And when Mom finds that Dad didn't pack the baby formula, it starts a domestic squabble.
No.
Dad can only plead guilty to being as tired as she is.
Darn.
In any case, it requires a quick stop at the first convenience store they can find.
You couldn't miss one feed.
The blast of cool air is a relief,
when you're hungry.
but it doesn't cool their tempers much. They mill about the store, hunting for baby stuff.
Yeah, almost.
and their bickering doesn't stop even at the cash register. They're anxious to finish this trip before they reach the breaking point. And from the look of things, that's not far off.
Well, that was great. You almost forgot what we went in there for in the first place.
They're both exhausted, and their lack of sleep is taking its toll. Like cats and dogs, they keep nipping at each other. If they can hold it together for a few more miles, they'll finally get a chance to rest. Back on the road, they're too tired to fight anymore. Instead, they drive along for the next half hour in stony silence. Miles of countryside roll away, and eventually their tempers cool. Then it's time for Junior's afternoon feeding. But when Mom turns to see how he's doing, to their horror, they discover there's no baby on board.
Where's the baby?
They realize they left their bundle of joy on the roof of the car.
Stop the car!
Meanwhile, back at the convenience store, the child sits safe and sound in the middle of the road, waiting for his parents' return. But did a pair of exhausted parents really forget their most precious package on the roof of their car? Or is this story a bit over the top? It's hard to know exactly when or where this story was born, but it's not in its infancy. Tales of abandoned bundles of joy have been around for decades, and for good reason.
It's very easy to be distracted and so caught up with what you're going to do next. And if the baby's sleeping, you forget. In the story, the baby is always safe. The issue is that it's really easy to forget things and put them on top of the car when you're loading.
Breastfeeds? Hell, your brother probably breastfeeds.
And if such concerns exist for the parents of one child, think about the possibilities for error when you have quadruplets.
There's all these fears you have as a parent, and Jackie and I both need our sleep, but we don't always get it. And so then it's just trying to manage your coping with your patience level and loving the children. We used to be able to just get up and run, go to a restaurant or go to the grocery store, and now it's become an experience. It's like we get the entourage ready and start passing children into car seats in the car. It's the mental grind, so we deal with it the best we can.
The legend hits very close to home and taps into primal parental fears. It also conjures up an unforgettable image, a hallmark of legend lore that makes the reality of the story a bit suspect. On the other hand, there have been real-life events that make the story ring true.
How many times in the news have we read where someone has the baby in the car seat in the back, the baby is asleep, the parent gets out of the car and it's a hot summer's day and goes to wherever the destination is, totally forgetting that that baby was still with him.
The baby! The baby, you need to stop! Stop!
It's a concern so real, there are even classes for new parents to avoid such pitfalls.
The biggest fear that I hear with new parents is sleep deprivation and how are they going to maintain their life with all the pressures of work and just the day-to-day living.
Remember, your baby's not had a parent to compare you to, so you're not screwing up.
Okay, good. My best part of my job is helping parents be parents and really helping them see the world through the eyes of a child and really taking hold of becoming a parent and seeing the effect they have on their children.
And a good thing to do is...
Things could be missed or overlooked. There's always a possibility it can happen if you aren't aware and take the time to really look at the environment or to prevent unfortunate situations from occurring.
Of course, the story's truth also depends upon physics and the question of what would really happen if a baby were left on the roof of a moving car. Well, there's only one way to know for sure. we called in our reality tester, Bob Harris, to perform an indelicate experiment.
In order to see if it's possible for this legend to be true, for someone to leave their baby on top of a van in a car seat and drive away onto a freeway, well, we needed a van and a car seat, baby. Babies are in short supply, so instead that will be a melon. And a driver, fire up the van, various speeds and accelerations, and see what occurs. So we strapped the melon in, patted its tender green head, put the key in the ignition, fired her up, and attempted to get to freeway speed at various rates of acceleration. When we gunned it, unfortunately we also gunned the melon. When we tried a more gradual approach, we still left melon on ground. It was only with extreme care that we were able to accelerate the car significantly at all before the melon eventually again hit pay dirt. Well, we did find that if we very, very carefully kept the car at a very smooth rate of acceleration, as if we knew there was a baby on top, it was possible to get the car up to speed. But it was extremely difficult, and so we'd have to consider this legend extremely unlikely.
Obviously, we took creative license in doing this test. Infant safety is no laughing matter, because the legend is true. As far back as 1980, a 1-year-old was left on the roof of a car in Queens, New York. The child was recovered by another motorist. Another true account involved an infant in Chicago who stayed on the car roof for 2 blocks before slipping off and being found. Neither child was seriously hurt, but this doesn't blunt the legend's message.
The message of this story is be careful. It's a cautionary tale. Our lives are so busy, we're so distracted, it's a warning of the dire circumstances that might occur if you aren't paying attention.
In this story, a baby is missing. But in our next legend, a fortune is found. True or false? Actor Charlie Chaplin once entered himself in a Chaplin look-alike contest and lost. The answer, when we return. Did Charlie Chaplin once lose a Chaplin look-alike contest? It's true. He didn't even make it to the finals.
Some urban legends deal with undeserved tragedy. Others are about bad guys who get their just desserts. And then there are those enthralling accounts of incredible dumb luck.
Our story begins with a scenic road trip and a man who needs to pull over for a rest stop. Having seen nothing else for miles, he decides to stop at a church he finds on a country road. The place is deserted. There's no one to ask about using the facilities, so he quietly slips inside. Moments later, he goes to wash his hands, and wouldn't you know it, there's no water. Anxious to get back on the road, he's about ready to leave when he notices the font by the entrance. Does he dare wash his hands in the holy water? It's just too sacrilegious. Still, who would know? Figuring cleanliness is next to godliness, he's about to do it when he senses something behind him. The priest, who assumes he's here for a viewing and invites him to pay his last respects. The traveler plays along. The chapel is empty, but at the far end is an altar with a photograph of the deceased and an urn containing his ashes. With the priest looking on, our traveler has no choice but to head up the aisle and offer his respects at the foot of the altar. He goes through the motions of offering prayers for the deceased gentleman, then heads back to the lobby to beat a hasty retreat. But before he gets out, the priest asks that he sign the guest book. Well, why not? Our traveler indulges him and jots down his name and address. Then he bids the priest goodbye and returns to the road. The following week, our traveler is back home going over some bills when a well-dressed gentleman appears at the door. The visitor turns out to be an attorney who wants to discuss a visit to a certain church about a week before.
Visit to Old World Church a couple days.
A bit leery over what this is all about, he invites the lawyer inside.
Listen, if this is about me,
Feeling guilty about his church visit, our traveler is ready to apologize if he offended anyone, and even to make restitution. But the attorney has a shocking surprise for him. He presents the estate of the deceased man. It turns out that the gentleman was quite wealthy, but also quite alone in his later years. So his will stipulated that his estate be divided up only among those who came to pay him last respects. Since our traveler was the only one to sign the guest book, he is the sole inheritor of $30 million. But did a chance visitor really stumble onto a fortune? Or are there inherent problems with this story?
The core idea of this legend is that someone performs a righteous act, and for that act of righteousness, he is rewarded when he expected no reward.
Tales of eccentric millionaires leaving loopy provisions in their wills have been around forever. Versions of this legend go back to a 1986 account in New York City, and the appeal of the story is pretty obvious. With a simple gesture of respect for the deceased, and by signing a guest book, a man realizes an age-old dream, getting a big pile of something for nothing. It's a dream that fuels the modern phenomenon of state lotteries, where the only nice thing you have to do is buy a ticket. Winning a jackpot in a slightly different way would be equally alluring. But the champagne fantasy that wealth brings instant happiness may not square with reality. In fact, believe it or not, there are actually support groups for people dealing with the pressures and pitfalls of sudden wealth.
You read about it in the newspaper about other people who crash and burn around lottery wins or inheritances, and you never think it could happen to you. The thing is, we don't appreciate how difficult it is to be thrown into this whole new range of choices. It can basically turn life upside down and inside out for a short period of time or forever. Depends upon how somebody actually manages this experience.
The state designates who your beneficiaries are going to be, and they designate an order of primary, secondary, and all the way on down to the furthest relative. The spouse is usually first, then the kids, the parents, the grandparents, nephews, nieces, cousins if there's nobody above them, and evidently that's what happened with Howard Hughes.
Hughes made his home in the world capital of quick cash, Las Vegas, the mecca of hope and greed, the very emotions that fuel the urban legend. And even Howard Hughes had trouble managing his money from the grave.
He had something like 22 cousins who inherited all of his money. They argued with each other. They all hired lawyers. Lawyers became very wealthy. That's a perfect example of what not to do.
An insane state of affairs which makes the legend more credible. If Hughes couldn't control who got his money, maybe the old man in the legend couldn't either. After all, he probably didn't intend a stranger to get his fortune. He wanted to reward the people from his life who cared enough to see him off. Unfortunately, no one did. But is a will really valid if no one specific is named as the beneficiary?
If you want to leave all of your assets to a complete stranger, you're certainly entitled to do so. There is no law that designates who your beneficiary is to be.
People have left their money to all sorts of charities, purposes, people, animals, what have you, so that it's not completely out of keeping with our sense of what people may do with their money after they're dead.
True stories like this one, in which a cantankerous old man who was never known to like children left his millions to the creation of a youth park. This again makes the legend ring true. But is it?
The story, is it possible? Yes, the story is possible. Is it likely? No.
And in fact, it never happened at all. The accounts circulating in the press were false. Nevertheless, the legend endures because it tells us that with a small act of kindness, we too could inherit a fortune we didn't earn. In this story, a lonely man leaves behind a fortune. But in our next legend, a lonely man leaves behind a death trap. True or false? The S in President Harry S. Truman's name doesn't stand for anything. The answer, when we return. Does Harry S. Truman's middle initials stand for nothing at all? True. His parents could not agree on a name, so they just settled for S.
Fear and paranoia are common urban ailments, but they're often out of proportion to the real threats. And sometimes, those who think they've outsmarted the criminals have only outsmarted themselves.
This strange drama begins with a lonely old man, an angry man who's become estranged from his family. After his wife caught him cheating on her, she divorced him and took the kids. He's hated them all ever since. Now he's in a legal battle with them over the house he built, and he's determined not to lose it. But one day, while distracted by yet another letter from his wife's attorney, he's killed by a shotgun booby trap in his bathroom. After his body is discovered, the police search the house for clues as to who planted the deadly trap. Did one of the man's relatives want to murder him? And if so, why was it done in such a bizarre manner? As they explore the house, one of the officers makes a sobering discovery. Another booby trap, another gun, hidden to catch an intruder by surprise, this one nearly killing a cop. It's then that they find the answer to the mystery, a schematic showing 20 lethal contraptions hidden throughout the house, each noted by a cryptic mark. Suddenly, the police find themselves surrounded by a house of death, so they call in help.
16, we're gonna need backup.
A demolitions expert comes in to scan the house as the police continue their own investigation. Among the things they find is an explosive attached to the television set, which has to be carefully disarmed. A knife rigged to do serious damage to the unwary. A pistol ready to fire from behind a bookshelf. And a total of 19 weapons and tripwires, all rigged by the old man to kill his relatives should any of them enter the house. But according to the schematic, there are 20 of these in all, meaning somewhere in the house, a single undiscovered death trap remains, and that puts the place off limits to everyone. Despite having killed himself with his own booby trap, the angry old man has the last word. His house is a den of death that his relatives dare not enter. A bizarre tale of paranoia and revenge. But is it true? Or does this account somehow miss the mark? People have been springing this story on unsuspecting listeners since the year 2000. But its appeal taps into a number of ideas with a long history. Real-life booby traps go all the way back to the pyramids of Egypt, where tombs filled with ancient treasures were protected by deadly devices that lay in wait for centuries. In the Middle Ages, a man's home was his castle. So just like the man in the legend, kings employed booby traps to fend off unwanted relatives, like princely sons hungry for dad's kingdom.
There's a paranoid element in this story.
a fear, in fact, that someone out there is trying to kill you. Although this story has an element that isn't so much paranoid as reflective of reality.
In this case, the reality is a house full of death, and the fear is felt by the cops, with whom we identify.
In many cases of the legends, these stories possess a psychological or moral truth that's sort of independent of any question of historical truth. Things can occur that don't engender stories, and stories can come without a specific incident creating them.
Another hint that the tale may be invented is the ironic plot twist of a man falling victim to his own diabolical creation. But it turns out that houses armed and ready to take out intruders are a modern reality. And while deadly deterrents are illegal in the United States, there are some countries where people pay handsomely to secure their homes with lethal defenses.
Europe has a more, in South America, a lot of the other countries take a different view to offensive systems. And you probably don't want to break into homes in those countries because all bets are off. In homes in countries like that, the homes can be incredibly offensive.
Of course, law enforcement can also be incredibly offensive. These commandos specialize in assault tactics in urban environments where booby traps are often left behind. But this usually happens in war zones or crack houses. Neither of these fit the legend. And the story is further undermined by the fact that no matter what the reason, most booby traps are found outdoors.
The reason why they're used outside more often than inside, quite frankly, is common sense. Picture a person, or yourself, and you're living in this dwelling. How safe is it for you to actually set booby traps up and then live with them? It's very easy for you to set off your own device. If you don't set off your own device, that could be a loved one that does it.
Of course, it's so-called loved ones that were the old man's target. Even so, chances are, if the legend were for real, the booby traps would be found outside in the surrounding woods. Which is why the business of training special teams usually involves moving through an outdoor obstacle course of hidden traps.
The first thing we do is we set up what we call a jungle walk, where there's actually lanes, and in these lanes through the woods are set up a number of booby traps.
The triggering devices range from tripwires to pressure pads to motion detectors.
When they trip a device, typically it will be a light that will light up. It can be a small explosive charge, which would produce a loud pop and a lot of smoke.
It's a lot of hard training, but primarily for outdoor hazards. So what does all this say about the credibility of the legend?
As far as the urban legend where an individual has seeded their own dwelling with booby traps is definitely in the realm of possibility.
As it turns out, the story is true. In November of 2002, 79-year-old Louis Dethy, a retired engineer in Belgium, was discovered dead in his own house. He was shot in the neck by a lethal booby trap intended for his estranged relatives. And while searching the lethal lair, an officer was nearly killed by one of the hidden weapons. Many of them were hidden shotguns, triggered by fishing line. The place was so ingeniously booby-trapped, military mine-clearing experts had to be brought in. Even then, only 19 of 20 known traps were found. In this case, a man's home was not his castle, but his tomb.
In the world of urban legends, lies often pass for truth, while reality is dismissed as fiction. It's a tangled web we've tried to unravel over the past hour. And we hope we've succeeded in separating deceptive stories from those that are mostly true.